In Umudike, Opueh's deceased wife, Nkiru, returns as a spirit. Their love defies death, and she becomes pregnant with a child bridging the living and spirit worlds. But the ancestors, shadows, and fearful villagers test their courage. Through danger, fear, and supernatural trials, Opueh and Nkiru fight to protect their miracle. This is a story of love, devotion, and a child born of the impossible. If you enjoy African folk stories filled with mysteries betrayed and justice, subscribe, like, and comment where you are watching from, and journey with us as the story begins. Opueh, a humble hunter from the ancient village of Umudike, lived a life of silence and reflection. His presence was calm, his eyes always filled with distant thoughts, as though his heart carried stories too heavy for words. The villagers respected him, not for wealth or power, but for the gentleness of his spirit. His wife, Nkiru, was the light that warmed his soul. She moved through the village like morning sunlight, her laughter soft, yet full of life. Her beauty was not only in her face, but in her kindness, her patience, and the way she spoke blessings over strangers and elders alike. Together, they built a home filled with love, shared dreams, and quiet hopes for children who had not yet come. At night, Opueh would listen to Nkiru sing ancestral lullabies, melodies passed down through generations. Their love was so deep that the village elders often whispered that the spirits themselves had joined their hearts. But destiny, cruel and unannounced, struck like thunder in the dry season. Nkiru fell ill without warning, her strength fading like smoke in the wind. Healers tried herbs, prayers, and rituals, yet her breath grew weaker with each passing dawn. On the final night of her life, Opueh held her trembling hands, begging the ancestors not to take her. When her spirit finally slipped away, his world collapsed. He screamed in grief, clutching her lifeless body, crying until his tears soaked the earth beneath them. The night after Nkiru's burial arrived heavy and restless, as though the sky itself mourned her passing. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the wind whispered through the palm trees like voices of wandering spirits. Opueh sat alone in his hut, staring at the empty mat where his wife once slept, his heart beating like a drum of sorrow. The silence felt alive, pressing against his ears until he could barely breathe. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like a reminder of her absence. He called her name softly, his voice trembling, hoping, foolishly, that she might answer. But only the echo of his grief returned to him. Suddenly, the oil lamp flickered as though touched by an unseen hand. A cold breeze brushed past his skin, sending chills down his spine. The scent of palm oil and wildflowers filled the room, the very scent Nkiru used to carry on her skin. Opueh's heart skipped a beat, fear and longing twisting together in his chest. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, light, and familiar. The kind of footsteps that once brought comfort and warmth to his soul. The air grew heavier, and he felt a presence behind him, gentle yet otherworldly. When he turned, his breath caught in his throat. There she stood. Nkiru's spirit glowed faintly, her form pale and shimmering like moonlight on water. Her eyes were filled with sadness and love, and her voice drifted through the room like a soft lament. Opueh, my husband, why do you let my memory die alone? Opueh fell to his knees the moment he realized the figure before him was not a dream. His hands trembled as tears streamed down his face, torn between terror and desperate love. The woman he buried beneath the Irako tree now stood in his hut, glowing with the sorrow of the unseen world. Nkiru's spirit drifted closer, her feet never touching the earth. Her presence carried the warmth of memory and the chill of death at the same time. When she lifted her hand, Opueh felt the ghost of her touch brush across his cheek, like a fading echo of the love they once shared. My husband, she whispered, her voice trembling like wind through dry grass. You buried my body, but you could not bury our love. My spirit wanders because my heart still belongs to you. Her words wrapped around him like chains of longing. Opueh reached out, but his fingers passed through her like smoke. His chest tightened as he cried out her name, begging the ancestors to explain why she had returned. He feared the power of the spirit world, yet his love overpowered every fear. As the night deepened, Nkiru looked at him with eyes filled with pain and unfinished destiny. I cannot rest, she said softly. There is something our love has not yet fulfilled. And in that moment, Opueh realized this haunting was only the beginning. The wind outside Opueh's hut grew louder, as though the ancestors themselves had gathered to witness the moment. The fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed, casting trembling shadows across the mud walls. Opueh remained frozen on the floor, staring at Nkiru's spirit with eyes soaked in disbelief, love, and fear. Nkiru's presence filled the room like a sacred song, heavy with longing. Her face still carried the gentleness he remembered, yet now it bore the sorrow of a soul trapped between worlds. The glow around her pulsed faintly, as though her spirit was struggling to hold its form in the realm of the living. "My love," she murmured, drifting closer. "Death took my body, but it did not break the promise we made beneath the Irako tree." Her voice trembled with emotion. "You promised me a life filled with children, laughter, and a home that would never fall silent." Opueh clenched his chest, recalling the nights they lay together dreaming of children who would carry their blood and names. The memory cut into him like a blade. He whispered her name again and again, begging her spirit to rest, begging her not to suffer in the afterlife because of unfulfilled dreams. But Nkiru shook her head slowly, tears shimmering like dew on moonlit leaves. "Our love is unfinished," she said, "and until it is fulfilled, my spirit will return every night." The night stretched endlessly, as though time itself had paused to watch a love that refused to die. Opueh sat trembling on the earth floor, torn between the warmth of memory and the terror of the supernatural. Before him stood Nkiru, the woman he had buried, the woman his heart had never released, the woman whose spirit now defied the boundary between life and death. Her eyes shone with deep emotion, reflecting both the world she left behind and the world she now belonged to. When she moved closer, the air around Opueh softened, carrying the familiar scent of wildflowers and palm oil. The scent of home, the scent of love, the scent of a life that had been cruelly stolen. "Do you still love me?" Nkiru asked gently, her voice trembling like a fragile flame. Opueh lifted his head slowly, tears carving paths down his face. "I have never stopped," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his grief. "Not even death could erase you from my heart." A soft, sorrowful smile touched Nkiru's lips. "Then our bond is stronger than the grave," she murmured. "But love alone cannot free me. There is a destiny tied to our union, a destiny that was never fulfilled before my body turned to dust." The fire crackled as silence filled the hut. Outside, the owls cried, and distant drums echoed faintly through the night. Opueh felt the presence of unseen forces surrounding them, listening, judging, and waiting. Love had crossed a forbidden boundary, and the spirits of the ancestors were watching closely. From that night onward, Nkiru's spirit returned as faithfully as the moon returns to the sky. Each evening, when the village fell silent and the last cooking fires dimmed, Opueh would sit alone in his hut, waiting. He no longer feared the darkness, because the darkness carried the memory of her presence. The villagers began to notice the change in him. His eyes grew hollow, his laughter disappeared, and his once strong posture bent under invisible weight. He stopped joining gatherings and avoided conversations, as though his heart now belonged to a world no one else could see. Many whispered that grief had broken his mind, but none understood the truth. Every night, the oil lamp flickered before she appeared. The air cooled, the scent of wildflowers returned, and Nkiru's shimmering form emerged like mist rising from a sacred river. She would sit beside him, speaking softly about their past, their dreams, and the children they never had. Opueh would tell her of his loneliness, of how the bed felt cold without her warmth, of how the village felt empty without her laughter. Tears often filled his eyes as he spoke, yet his heart felt alive again in her presence, as though love itself had conquered death. Slowly, their meetings became more than memories. They became a bond, a ritual, a forbidden union between the living and the dead. And though Opueh did not yet understand it, the boundary between worlds was beginning to weaken. As the nights passed, the presence of Nkiru's spirit began to feel less like a haunting and more like a return home. What once filled Opueh with fear slowly transformed into a strange comfort. The boundary between his world and hers seemed to thin, like cloth worn down by time and tears. At first, her touch had been nothing more than a whisper of memory, a breeze against his skin, a warmth that vanished too quickly. But soon, her presence grew stronger. When she reached for him, Opueh could feel the faint echo of her fingers, cold yet familiar, like rain touching sun-warmed earth. He began to speak to her not as a ghost, but as his wife. He shared stories of his day, his regrets, his dreams, and the unbearable ache of living without her. In return, Nkiru spoke of the spirit realm, a place of shadows, whispers, and restless souls who wandered with unfinished destinies. Each night I return, she confessed softly. My spirit grows more tied to you, and less tied to the world of the dead. Love is pulling me across a forbidden path. Her eyes glowed with a mix of devotion and sorrow, as though she feared the consequences of their bond. Outside the hut, the ancestors stirred. Dogs howled at the moon, birds fled at dusk, and the elders felt a strange heaviness in the air. Something unnatural was unfolding in Umudike, and the balance between life and death was slowly being disturbed by love that refused to let go. The village of Umudike began to feel different, as though an unseen storm hovered above it. The air felt heavier, the nights quieter, and the dreams of the people more restless. Elders spoke of strange omens, dogs crying at midnight, fire refusing to burn steadily, and children waking from sleep claiming they saw shadows that did not belong to the living. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the chief priest Daibi Okari felt a sudden tremor beneath his feet while performing ancestral prayers. The sacred kola nuts rolled from his hands, and the sacred shrine flickered with an unnatural wind. He knew immediately that a spiritual imbalance had entered the land. The ancestors spoke through whispers in the smoke of burning herbs. They warned of a love that had crossed forbidden boundaries, of a bond between the living and the dead that threatened the natural order. Daibi Okari bowed his head, fear filling his chest as he realized that a wandering spirit had refused to rest. That same night, Opueh dreamed of standing beneath the Irako tree where Nkiru was buried. In the dream, ancestral spirits appeared with glowing eyes and stern voices, warning him that love without limits could awaken sorrow beyond human understanding. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding with dread. Yet when Nkiru's spirit returned later that night, Opueh could not turn away. Even as the ancestors warned of danger, his heart chose love over fear. And with each night that passed, the unseen world drew closer to the world of the living, tightening its grip on destiny. Opueh could no longer resist the pull of Nkiru's spirit. Every night, as the village of Umudike fell into slumber, he would sit before the flickering fire, waiting for the glow that signaled her arrival. Though the ancestors' warnings echoed in his dreams, the ache in his chest, the emptiness of his life without her, was a force stronger than fear. When she appeared, she shimmered in the dim light like mist over the river at dawn. Her eyes reflected a mixture of longing and sadness, and her soft voice trembled with the weight of worlds colliding. "Opueh, you should not bear this alone," she whispered, reaching for him with hands that were neither fully of flesh nor entirely of shadow. He grasped the air, his fingers brushing her form, feeling warmth and cold entwined. "I will face whatever comes," he said, voice raw with desperation. "If the spirits rage, if the ancestors curse me, I will not leave you. Not now. Not ever." His words hung in the hut like a spell, daring the unseen forces to break him. For hours, they spoke, touched, and remembered. Stories of their life together spilled into the night. Childhood memories, stolen smiles, and shared dreams of the future. But within the beauty of reunion lurked a creeping darkness. Each night, their bond grew stronger, and with every touch, Nkiru's spirit lingered longer in the world of the living, straining the fragile barrier that separated life from death. Outside the hut, the world felt the disturbance. The wind carried whispers of unrest through the palm groves, and the river, usually calm at night, roared faintly as if warning of a coming storm. Opueh did not care. His soul had chosen its path, and even if it meant defying the will of the spirits, he would follow love that refused to let go. The night had never felt so alive, nor so heavy. The wind rattled the mud walls of Opueh's hut, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant rain. Even the moon seemed to hold its breath as if the heavens themselves were watching the forbidden union about to unfold. Opueh sat alone, heart pounding, knowing that this night would change everything. Nkiru appeared without a sound, her form glowing faintly like the first light of dawn over the hills. Her eyes, filled with longing and sadness, met his, and the air between them shimmered with something that neither life nor death could define. "Opueh, tonight," she whispered, her voice trembling like the wind through dry grass. "Tonight we cross the line the world forbids." Opueh's chest tightened with fear and desire. "I do not care what the spirits say," he answered, his voice thick with tears. "I cannot live without you. Even if it means my own soul is broken, I will be with you." The words fell into the night like a sacred vow, raw, desperate, and irrevocable. As they moved closer, the boundaries of the living and the dead began to blur. His hands could feel the echo of her warmth, soft as a memory, yet solid enough to pull him into her embrace. Their lips met in a kiss that carried the weight of every lost moment, every unfulfilled dream, every tear shed in loneliness. The hut seemed to pulse around them, alive with the force of their forbidden love. For hours, they clung to each other, speaking in whispers, crying in each other's arms, and surrendering to a love that defied the natural order. Outside, the wind howled like spirits mourning, the river rippled violently, and somewhere, deep in the forest, a lone owl cried in warning. Yet inside, Opueh and Nkiru existed in a bubble of impossible eternity, unaware that with this night, their union had begun a chain of events that would bring joy, tragedy, and tears beyond imagining. Days passed like whispers of smoke through the village, yet Opueh noticed something shifting in the air around him. Nkiru's spirit no longer flickered or seemed hesitant. Her glow was steadier, warmer, as though life itself had begun to take root within her ethereal form. The first hint of a child, an impossible miracle, had begun its journey between the worlds. Opueh trembled the moment he sensed it. Alone, he spoke to the night. "Is this real, Nkiru? Can the dead bear life?" But even as he spoke, he could feel it, a small pulse of energy within her, a presence stronger than any spirit he had ever known. It was the echo of a heartbeat, soft and fragile, yet undeniably alive. Nkiru's eyes shone with both joy and sorrow. "It is real, my love," she said, her voice trembling like sunlight through a morning mist. "Our child, it is born of love that defies death. But it is fragile, bound to both the living and the dead. We must be careful, for the ancestors will not forgive lightly." Opueh's hands shook as he reached for her. He wanted to hold her, to touch this miracle, but the truth of the supernatural boundary pressed on him like chains. Every night, as she came closer, their connection grew stronger, and so did the risk of angering the spirits that watched, silent and patient, from the shadows of the world. The village itself seemed to respond to this unnatural pregnancy. Cows refused to feed in the pastures, fires flickered unpredictably, and the river murmured as though whispering secrets only Opueh could hear. Yet through the fear and the looming threat of ancestral wrath, he could not stop his heart from swelling with awe and love. A child of the living and the dead, an impossible life, was growing because of him, because of their forbidden love. Night fell heavier than ever over Umudike, as though the sky itself had grown anxious. The palm trees whispered in languages unknown, their leaves brushing against one another with urgent insistence. The river that usually lulled the village to sleep now gurgled and roared, carrying faint, sorrowful cries that no living human could understand. The ancestors were speaking, warning, judging, watching. Inside his hut, Opueh trembled as he awaited Nkiru's return. When she appeared, her glow was brighter than ever, yet tinged with a strange, shadowy hue. Her eyes, deep and knowing, reflected joy for the life growing within her and sorrow for the dangers surrounding them. "The spirits are restless tonight," she whispered, her voice barely more than the wind brushing dry grass. "They know what we have done, Opueh. They know the child we carry is bound to both worlds." He reached for her hand, feeling the cold warmth of her spirit, and his heart tightened with both fear and wonder. "Then we must protect it," he said, his voice raw with determination. "No matter what the spirits say, no matter what the world demands, I will not let harm touch this child, or you." Nkiru smiled faintly, touched by his unwavering courage, yet sadness lingered in her ethereal gaze. That night, as the village slept uneasily, whispers began to drift through the air, soft, and almost melodic, but laced with menace. Invisible voices circled the hut, murmuring secrets of the balance between life and death, of the consequences that come when love defies the laws of the universe. Opueh could hear the sighs of spirits pressing close, their lamentations weaving into the shadows of the room. And yet, despite the fear, despite the looming wrath of the ancestors, he refused to look away. Each night, as Nkiru drew nearer, their connection deepened, stronger than grief, stronger than death itself. The impossible pregnancy grew slowly, an echo of hope and defiance. But every heartbeat of the child seemed to pull the unseen world closer, stirring forces that would not wait silently for their defiance to end. The following night, the village of Umudike was restless, as if the earth itself sensed the growing disturbance between the living and the dead. Smoke curled from every hearth, carrying the faint whispers of ancestors disturbed by the unnatural union. Even the wind seemed to avoid the paths of the villagers, moving instead along hidden trails and hollows, carrying messages that only spirits could interpret. Deep within the heart of the village, the chief priest Opueh prepared a warning ritual. He placed sacred kola nuts, white chalk, and palm fronds upon the earth in precise patterns, each representing the fragile balance between the worlds. He muttered incantations passed down through generations, calling upon the spirits to speak and reveal the source of the unrest. His hands shook with urgency. He knew that a spirit had broken the natural order, and he feared the consequences not just for the village, but for the fragile thread between life and death. Meanwhile, Opueh awaited Nkiru in his hut, unaware of the ritual forming in the heart of the village. When she appeared, her form radiant yet heavy with sorrow, he saw the fear in her eyes. "Opueh, tonight is different," she murmured, her voice trembling like wind through dry leaves. "The ancestors have sensed the child. They know that love has crossed boundaries meant to never be crossed. They will act soon, and we may not survive their anger." Opueh's heart raced, but he refused to show fear. "Let them come," he whispered fiercely, placing his hand on hers. "We have defied death. We have chosen love. Whatever punishment they send, I will face it. I will not abandon you. I will not abandon our child." Nkiru's ethereal hand rested over his, warmth and cold entwined, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. They were defiant, but the world beyond the living stirred with an ancient fury. As Opueh began to chant louder, the ground around the village trembled faintly, and unseen winds howled through the trees. Opueh felt a pressure in the hut, a pull in the air that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Shadows twisted unnaturally around him, and Nkiru's glow dimmed as if struggling against an invisible force. The child within her stirred, and Opueh understood with a shudder. The first confrontation with the ancestors had begun. The night was thick with foreboding, a darkness that seemed to press on the earth itself. The trees of Umudike bent unnaturally in the windless night, their shadows stretching toward Opueh's hut like fingers of judgment. From deep within the forest, a low, mournful chant began, a sound that vibrated through the ground and rattled the bones of anyone who dared listen. The ancestors had arrived, and their presence was a storm in the spirit world and the living world at once. Inside the hut, Opueh felt the air grow heavier. Nkiru's glow flickered, her form wavering as if the force of the unseen ancestors was trying to pull her back into the spirit realm. Her eyes, filled with sorrow and fear, met Opueh's. "They are here," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rising chant. "They will not tolerate what we have done. They will test us and the child." Suddenly, shadows surged through the walls, twisting like living smoke. Voices, neither human nor fully spirit, spoke in a language older than memory, accusing Opueh of breaking the sacred laws. "You dare defy death," they hissed. "You dare bind a soul of the living with one of the dead. You shall pay." Opueh trembled but did not move. He had promised Nkiru that he would face whatever came, and he would not waver now. Nkiru's spirit rose higher, radiating light that clashed violently with the darkness pressing in from the ancestors. "We love beyond death," she cried, and the sound was both a plea and a command. The hut shook violently, the flames of the fire leaping into the air as if touched by unseen hands. Opueh reached for her, his hands brushing her ethereal form, feeling the warmth and the pulse of the life growing within her. They clung to each other, defiance and love binding them stronger than fear. The chanting grew louder, more furious, and Opueh could feel invisible hands pressing on his chest. But even as the ancestors tested their resolve, he refused to relent. Tears ran down his cheeks, his voice breaking as he shouted, "This child is love itself, born of devotion, of promises kept. If you strike us down, you will strike the memory of love from this world." For a moment, silence fell, a trembling pause in the night, as if the spirits themselves were shocked by the force of his defiance. Days passed in a strange, trembling quiet. The village of Umudike moved on, but the world inside Opueh's hut had changed forever. Nkiru's glow was steady now, her spirit warmer, stronger. The impossible child, born of love and defiance, grew quietly, yet its presence rippled through the air, making every breath feel sacred and heavy with magic. Opueh watched her closely, filling his chest like a drumbeat. He could see the faint outlines of life inside her spirit form, a pulse of energy, subtle yet undeniable. Each night he held her hands and whispered to their child, promising protection, love, and a world where it could live. Even the boundaries between life and death seemed to soften under the weight of their devotion. Nkiru would smile softly, but tears often shimmered in her eyes. "It is fragile," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "A soul caught between worlds is never safe. The ancestors still watch. They test us, Opueh, and yet, somehow it endures." Her words carried both hope and sorrow, a melody that wrapped around his heart like sacred silk. Sometimes, the wind would howl outside as though spirits were circling, warning them of the precarious balance they were disturbing. Shadows twisted in the corners of the hut, yet inside, life blossomed. Opueh felt it, the heartbeat of their child, faint but certain, and it gave him courage that no fear could shake. He whispered promises of protection, of bravery, of a love so strong that even death itself could not unravel it. And so, night after night, their ritual continued. Love and longing, life and death, and the impossible miracle between them intertwined. The impossible child grew quietly, unseen by the villagers, yet the air around Opueh's hut seemed different, heavier, sacred, and trembling with expectation. It was a miracle born not only of flesh and spirit, but of devotion, defiance, and a love that would not bow even before the wrath of ancestors. The nights in Umudike grew heavier, weighed down by a sense of foreboding that even the villagers could feel in their bones. Cattle huddled in the barns, restless and uneasy. The river, usually calm, churned faintly in the moonlight, whispering secrets only the oldest spirits could understand. Something had shifted. The ancestors were growing impatient, their warning no longer gentle. Inside his hut, Opueh noticed subtle changes in Nkiru. Her glow flickered more frequently, shadows dancing along her ethereal form as though unseen fingers were tugging at her essence. Sometimes she would shiver uncontrollably, murmuring words in the old tongue, an ancient prayer he did not understand but could feel deep in his chest. He held her closer, whispering promises to the unborn child, even as dread pooled in his heart. One night, as the wind howled like a mourning spirit through the palm trees, Opueh saw it. A single, dark shadow moving independently along the walls of the hut, coiling and twisting as though alive. It seemed to watch him, to measure him, before dissolving into the night. He knew in that instant that the ancestors' patience had thinned and the safety of their child was no longer guaranteed. Nkiru rested her hands on her spirit form, feeling the heartbeat of the child inside her. "Opueh," she whispered, her voice trembling like a fragile branch under rain. "The world we have crossed into is fragile. The ancestors will test us soon, and this child will be the proof of our love or the cause of our sorrow." Her words wrapped around his soul, a mixture of hope and despair, and he felt tears sting his eyes, unashamed in the darkness. Outside, the night seemed to listen, the shadows stretching longer, the wind sighing through the village like a warning of storms yet to come. Opueh and Nkiru held each other close, hearts beating in tandem, knowing that their love had created life, yet that life had drawn the gaze of forces beyond comprehension. The first omen of danger had come, and soon, They would be tested in ways that no mortal or spirit could have foreseen. The night arrived with a redness in the sky that sent shivers through every living soul in Umudike. The villagers whispered of a blood moon, rare and ominous, but none knew the full truth. The ancestors themselves had risen to witness the consequences of love that dared defy death. The moon's crimson glow poured over the palm trees, turning shadows into claws and making the river ripple with restless energy. Inside his hut, Opueh could feel the weight of the world pressing down. Nkiru's glow was faint, flickering like a candle in a storm, and her form trembled as though buffeted by invisible winds. "Opueh, tonight they come to test us," she murmured, her voice quivering with both love and fear. "We cannot hide. We cannot run. The child will be the proof of our devotion." The wind outside surged, carrying the cries of spirits whose faces he could not see. Shadows writhed along the walls, stretching and twisting as though alive. Opueh rose, placing himself protectively before Nkiru. "I will face them," he whispered fiercely, eyes burning with desperation. "I will protect you and our child. Even if it costs my life, I will not let them take what we have created." Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a low, haunting chant echoed through the hut, seeming to come from every direction at once. The ancestors had arrived in full force, their presence so heavy that it made the mud walls tremble. Nkiru's form shook violently, and Opueh wrapped his arms around her spirit, whispering words of love and courage, feeling the pulse of life within her, a heartbeat that defied death itself. And then, as the blood moon reached its zenith, the impossible child stirred. A faint glow emanated from Nkiru's form, pulsing in time with the moon's crimson light. Opueh knew, in the deepest part of his soul, that this night would mark the beginning of a trial that could either destroy them or cement their love forever. The ancestors were here, watching, testing, and waiting to see if devotion could truly triumph over the laws of the living and the dead. The blood moon hung high, casting a crimson glow that seemed to set the earth itself ablaze. Outside, the wind howled with voices that were not human, weaving through the village like an unending lament. Opueh could feel the pressure of the ancestors' gaze, as if invisible eyes were burning through his very soul, judging every heartbeat, every intention. Tonight, the trial would begin. Shadows gathered at the edges of the hut, thick and twisting, taking shapes that made Opueh's blood run cold. Faces, half-seen and unholy, pressed close to the walls, whispering curses in the ancient tongue. "You dare defy the laws of life and death," they hissed in voices like dry leaves scraping stone. "The child you carry is not of this world. You will answer for your arrogance." Nkiru's glow flared fiercely, her voice ringing like a bell through the storm of shadows. "We love beyond death," she cried. "Our child is born of devotion, of promises kept. It is life, not rebellion, that you see as defiance." Her form pulsed with light, growing warmer, brighter, as the unborn child within her stirred, sending waves of energy that pushed back against the gathering darkness. Opueh stepped forward, placing himself between the shadows and Nkiru. He felt a fear unlike any he had known, but his resolve was stronger than terror. "If you wish to test me, if you wish to claim punishment, know this: I will not let harm touch her or our child. I do not fear death, for my heart beats only for them." Tears ran down his face, a mixture of rage, love, and desperate hope, and the air around him seemed to hum with power. For a long moment, the shadows wavered, as if unsure how to respond to such defiance. The hut trembled, the wind screamed through the cracks, and the ancestors' whispers grew louder, more urgent. And yet, even in the presence of wrathful spirits, life pulsed between Opueh and Nkiru. The child stirred again, tiny but undeniable, a beacon of impossible hope. On this night, under the blood moon, love and courage faced the fury of the dead, and the outcome remained uncertain, fragile as the beating of a newborn heart. As the blood moon lingered in the sky, a hush fell over Umudike, broken only by the wind sighing through the palm trees. Inside Opueh's hut, time seemed to slow, the air heavy with anticipation. Nkiru's glow had softened, yet a warmth radiated from her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The child, their impossible miracle, stirred within her, sending ripples of energy that brushed against Opueh's soul. Suddenly, a faint sound emerged, a cry, so small, so fragile, that it could have been mistaken for the whisper of the wind. Opueh froze, heart hammering in his chest. It is alive, he whispered, voice trembling with awe and disbelief. Nkiru's eyes sparkled with tears, her spectral form trembling as though the act of life itself was too beautiful, too miraculous to behold. The cry grew stronger, echoing in the room, filling every corner with a sound that was both human and unearthly. The shadows that had pressed against the walls during the ancestral trial recoiled, as though the pure force of love and life repelled them. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, listening to the child's first cry, acknowledging the impossible miracle that had survived the wrath of the spirits. Opueh fell to his knees beside Nkiru, placing his hands over her glowing form and feeling the pulse of life beneath his fingertips. You have done it, he whispered, tears streaming freely. We have done it, against death itself. Nkiru leaned into him, her voice choked with emotion. Our love, it is stronger than the laws of the ancestors, stronger than fate itself. Our child is proof. And then, as the blood moon reached its zenith, a radiant light filled the hut, warm and golden, wrapping around Opueh, Nkiru, and the child. The ancestors' whispers softened, fading into a distant hum, and for the first time in nights, peace settled over the house. The impossible life they had created, the child born of love that defied death, had announced its presence to the world. It was a victory carved from grief, devotion, and unyielding courage, but Opueh knew in his heart that trials still awaited. Love had triumphed for now, but the road ahead would demand more than hearts and courage. It would demand sacrifice. The dawn after the blood moon arrived in Umudike with an eerie silence. Birds refused to sing, and even the river moved sluggishly, as if carrying the weight of what had unfolded the night before. The villagers, sensing the unnatural calm, whispered among themselves, their voices laced with fear and awe. But inside Opueh's hut, the impossible miracle slept, radiant in Nkiru's arms, a tiny pulse of life straddling two worlds. Without warning, the air shifted. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating in the bones of both living and dead. The ancestors had come, not to punish, but to speak, their presence heavy yet measured. One by one, ghostly forms took shape, hovering just beyond the threshold of the hut, their faces stern, ageless, and unyielding. Opueh, Nkiru, the voices intoned together. You have dared to bind the worlds with love. You have created life where death should have ruled. For this, we speak a decree. Opueh clutched Nkiru's hand, his pulse racing. Fear and hope tangled in his chest as the voices continued. This child, this life, is sacred, yet fragile. It belongs to both the living and the dead. You may raise it, but beware, its path will be treacherous, for envy and wrath will shadow it. You must protect it at all costs, and teach it the balance of worlds. Nkiru's eyes widened, tears streaming down her glowing face. We will obey. We will protect it, she whispered, her voice filled with reverence and exhaustion. The ancestors' forms pulsed with energy, creating a storm of light and shadow around the hut. Your bond is remarkable, the spirits said. Love has triumphed this once, but know this. The world will test you, the living will fear you, and many will question the existence of what you have created. Prepare for hardship, Opueh, for no mortal has ever walked this path unscathed. The room trembled as their words sank deep into Opueh's soul. He understood that their victory was temporary, fragile as the first dawn light on the river, yet he would not yield. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the ancestors receded, leaving behind a silence thick with power. The hut seemed ordinary again, the shadows retreating, the air warm and gentle. Yet Opueh and Nkiru knew that the decree would shape the rest of their lives, and the child's life, forever. They held each other close, feeling the heartbeat of their miracle against the pulse of the world, knowing that love had carved a place between life and death, but that the journey ahead would demand courage, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. The morning after the ancestral decree, the village of Umudike awoke with a strange heaviness. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something intangible, as though the blood moon had left a trace that the living could sense. Villagers whispered about Opueh's hut, the light that sometimes glimmered at night, and the child whose first cries were said to carry the echo of the dead. Fear began to twist through the streets like a creeping vine. Children avoided the paths near Opueh's home, clutching their mother's skirts and peering into the shadows. Elders muttered prayers, warning of curses, spirits, and dangers that could not be seen. "He walks with ghosts," one woman hissed. "He and his wife have crossed the line no mortal should cross." But none dared approach openly. The power of life and death that surrounded the hut made the hair on their arms stand on end. Inside the hut, Opueh held the child, now slightly older, radiant, and pulsing with energy beyond the natural world. Nkiru floated beside him, her spirit form luminous and protective. "They do not understand," she whispered softly, voice trembling with sorrow. "They will fear what they cannot touch, what they cannot see. But we must not falter. Our child is stronger than fear, stronger than death itself." Opueh nodded, determination etched in his face. "We will show them the truth through love," he said, though even he could feel the tension thickening outside their walls. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, whispers carried on the wind, and sometimes livestock would refuse to enter his yard. The village's fear was growing, feeding on mystery and ancient suspicion. The first seed of isolation took root. No longer were Opueh and Nkiru simply a loving couple. They were a family both miraculous and cursed, walking a path between worlds that no mortal had ever walked before. And as the sun set, the glow from their home cast long, eerie shadows, reminding the villagers that some forces of love were stronger than fear, but perhaps not stronger than fate. One evening, a stranger appeared at the edge of the village. He was tall, cloaked in dark fabrics that fluttered like smoke in the wind, eyes glinting with knowledge of unseen realms. He walked with purpose toward Opueh's hut, seemingly unaffected by the villagers' fearful whispers and hurried warnings. Opueh and Nkiru sensed his approach before he spoke. Nkiru's glow brightened in tension, and the child within her stirred, sensing the arrival of a force it could not yet comprehend. The stranger paused at the doorway, eyes fixed on the child and then on Opueh. "I have come to offer guidance," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "The ancestors' decree is not a mercy, it is a warning. You have created life beyond the natural order, and it will draw enemies, both seen and unseen." Opueh's jaw tightened. "We will face whatever comes," he said, protective and unwavering. "No one will harm this child. Not you, not the ancestors, not anyone." His hands trembled slightly as he held the child closer, sensing the truth in the stranger's words but refusing to yield. The stranger knelt, almost reverently, before the child. "This life is powerful," he said softly. "It is a bridge between the living and the dead. But every bridge must be protected. Many will seek to destroy it, to sever what you have created. You must train it, nurture it, and shield it. Otherwise, the consequences will be catastrophic." Nkiru's glow flickered with worry. "We will protect it," she said, softly but firmly, "even if we must give our lives." Opueh nodded, realizing that the child's destiny was no longer simply about love or defiance. It was about survival, courage, and the balance between worlds. That night, as the blood moon rose again on the horizon, shadows slithered closer to Opueh's hut. This time, they did not hide. They pressed against the walls, whispering in voices that were neither fully spirit nor human. "The child is ours," they hissed, carrying the chill of death in every syllable. "You dare keep life where it does not belong." Opueh's hands trembled, but he stood firm, placing himself before Nkiru and the child. "No," he shouted. "This child is of love and life. You will not touch it. You will not break what has been created." His voice echoed through the night, carrying the strength of devotion that had already defied death itself. Nkiru's form flared with light, brighter and warmer than ever. "They will test us," she said, her voice strong despite fear. "But our love is stronger. We are bound by what is real, and this child is proof." The child stirred again, tiny arms reaching out as if sensing danger and responding with its own spark of life. The shadows writhed, twisting into horrifying shapes, their whispers sharpening into screams. For hours, they circled the hut, pressing against the barriers of love, testing Opueh's courage and the strength of the bond between the living and the dead. But no matter how strong they struck, they could not break the walls of devotion. By dawn, the shadows retreated reluctantly, leaving only the distant echo of warning in the air. Opueh and Nkiru clutched the child close, breathing in relief but understanding that the night had only proven one thing. The world would not let them live in peace, and their greatest trials were still ahead. Weeks later, the child grew, and the miraculous bond it shared with both life and death became clearer. Though still young, the child began to speak, not with ordinary words, but with whispers that carried knowledge far beyond mortal comprehension. Its first words startled Opueh and Nkiru. "I see the shadows," it said softly one night, eyes wide and glowing faintly. "They wait. They watch. They are coming." The child's voice carried a clarity and authority that made the air in the hut vibrate. Even the normally stoic Opueh felt a chill crawl down his spine. Nkiru held the child tightly, tears streaking her glowing face. "You are stronger than we imagined," she whispered. "You carry the essence of both worlds. But you must be careful. The ancestors and the unseen will test you, and the shadows are relentless." Opueh nodded, a mix of awe and fear flooding his heart. "We will teach you," he said firmly. "You will learn courage, wisdom, and the strength to survive in a world that fears and misunderstands you. Together, we will face whatever comes." The night settled quietly, yet the knowledge of looming trials hung like a storm cloud on the horizon. The child's words were a reminder. Life had been carved from love and defiance, but survival demanded more than devotion. It demanded cunning, bravery, and the unwavering bond of a family born of both the living and the dead. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a violent wind surged through the village, carrying with it a darkness unlike anything Opueh had felt. The shadows returned, no longer distant or whispering. They struck directly, clawing at the walls, bending the mud and wood of the hut as if it were paper. Fear gripped even the strongest in Umudike, who could feel the unnatural force radiating from Opueh's home. Opueh stood protectively in front of Nkiru and the child, fists clenched, heart pounding with terror and determination. "You will not harm them," he shouted into the night, voice shaking but fierce. Nkiru's glow flared in response, her spectral form radiating light strong enough to push back some of the attacking shadows. The child stirred violently, tiny limbs glowing with a power that neither parent fully understood. With every heartbeat, energy rippled outward, striking the shadows and forcing them to recoil. Yet the attack was relentless. More shadows poured in, shapes twisting with malice, voices chanting in tongues older than time. For hours, the family resisted. The wind screamed, the trees groaned, and even the village seemed to hold its breath. Opueh drew strength from his love for Nkiru and the child, holding the line between life and death with every ounce of courage in his body. Their bond was a shield, their love a weapon against forces that sought to unmake them. As dawn broke, the shadows finally withdrew, retreating into the forest, leaving Opueh, Nkiru, and the child battered but unbroken. Their home had survived, and their family remained intact. But Opueh knew this was only the beginning. The world, the spirits, and the ancestors themselves would continue testing them, and the trials would grow ever darker and more dangerous. Weeks passed since the first attack, and the child began to display abilities that neither Opueh nor Nkiru fully understood. At night, its tiny hands would reach toward the shadows, and a soft glow would push the darkness back, almost as if the child was a living shield between life and death. Its cries carried an echo that resonated through the village, awakening animals, stirring spirits, and bending the wind itself. Opueh watched, awestruck and fearful. "It is more than a child," he whispered, holding Nkiru close. "It carries both life and spirit. It may be our salvation, or our doom." Nkiru's ethereal form flared brightly, wrapping the child in protective light. "We must teach it control," she said, her voice heavy with worry. "The ancestors will not allow power without discipline. They will test it as they tested us." The villagers noticed strange happenings, fires that refused to burn, crops bending toward the hut, shadows that seemed alive only near their home. Fear began to rise again. Some whispered that Opueh's family was cursed. Others whispered that the child was a blessing, though too powerful to be fully understood. Even within the hut, the child's energy was overwhelming. Objects floated, small sparks danced along its fingers, and it sometimes murmured in a language that Opueh could not comprehend but felt deep in his soul. "It is speaking to the unseen," Nkiru whispered. "It understands both worlds, more than we could ever hope." Opueh pressed a hand to his forehead, exhausted but determined. The child's awakening was both miraculous and terrifying. Every heartbeat carried the weight of love, power, and destiny, and every pulse reminded them that the trials had only begun. As the child's powers grew, so did the fear and suspicion among the villagers. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Opueh has bound a spirit to life. They are cursed. Their child is not of this world." Mothers pulled their children close at night. Men avoided the hut, and elders debated whether the family should be exiled or destroyed. Opueh and Nkiru felt the weight of judgment, yet they could not leave their home. "We cannot abandon the child," Opueh said firmly. "This is our family. No fear can take that from us." Nkiru's glow dimmed slightly, reflecting her worry. "But they do not understand," she whispered. "Their fear will grow, and fear can lead to violence." One evening, a group of villagers approached the hut, armed with sticks and torches, demanding answers. "Show us your child," one man shouted, "or leave this village, for we cannot live with this abomination among us." Opueh stepped forward, anger and desperation igniting his voice. "This child is life, love, and proof of devotion. You have no right to judge it." The villagers hesitated as the child stirred, tiny hands glowing faintly. Shadows near the group recoiled, animals scattered, and the wind carried a low hum that vibrated through the earth. Even the bravest among the villagers felt fear clawing at their hearts, a reminder that some forces were not meant to be challenged. The group retreated, shaken and fearful, yet whispers spread like wildfire. Opueh realized the truth. The world would never fully accept them. Their family existed between realms, and every day would be a battle, not only with spirits, but with human fear, prejudice, and ignorance. Knowing that the child's power could not remain uncontrolled, Nkiru and Opueh began teaching it the balance between life and death. Every night, they created exercises, guiding the child to control its glow, its ability to repel shadows, and its mysterious language of the spirits. Even in infancy, the child's comprehension was astonishing, responding to gestures, whispers, and the deep bond of trust with its parents. Opueh placed his hands around the child, whispering in the language of their ancestors. "Focus, little one," he murmured. "Your life is both fragile and strong. Learn to walk between worlds with care, or the balance will be broken." Nkiru guided the child's glowing hands, teaching it to harness the power without harming the living or angering the spirits. The shadows occasionally returned during training, testing the child's abilities and resilience. Sometimes, the child cried, frightened by the unseen force pressing against it, but under Opueh and Nkiru's careful guidance, it learned to repel the darkness with soft glows and gentle murmurs. By the end of each session, the child would collapse in their arms, exhausted but growing stronger. Each heartbeat, each whisper, each glow reinforced the bond between the family and the unseen world. They were not just surviving. They were preparing, shaping the child to navigate a path no mortal or spirit had ever walked. Opueh often sat in silence afterward, watching the child sleep. "We are raising a bridge," he whispered, "a miracle and a weapon, and the world will test it." Nkiru nodded silently, her eyes filled with equal parts hope and dread, knowing the challenges ahead would demand more than courage. They would demand sacrifice. One night, the wind returned violently, carrying a red haze that seemed to seep into the village like a living thing. Shadows danced and twisted along the horizon, forming shapes that Opueh had never seen. Nkiru's glow flared with alarm, and the child stirred, tiny hands glowing with instinctive power. The ancestors' voices whispered urgently in the wind. A storm of trials was coming. "Something approaches," Nkiru said, voice tight with tension. "Not just spirits, something older, something angry. We must protect the child." Opueh gathered the family together, creating a circle of protection around the glowing child. Energy pulsed from them, radiating warmth and light that met the encroaching darkness with defiance. The storm of shadows pressed harder, rattling the hut and bending the trees. The villagers watched from afar, terrified, realizing that Opueh's family had become a fulcrum for forces they could not comprehend. Animals ran wild, the river churned, and even the sky seemed to boil with unnatural color. For hours, the family held their ground, the child glowing brighter with every heartbeat, Nkiru flaring in radiant light, and Opueh standing as a living shield of courage. And then, as the wind reached its peak, the storm suddenly broke, leaving behind an eerie silence. The ancestors' voices lingered faintly, approving yet warning, and Opueh knew the first true battle for the child's survival had been won, but the war was far from over. By dawn, Opueh, Nkiru, and the child were exhausted but resolute. The village had begun to whisper less with fear and more with awe, though suspicion remained. Their home glowed faintly in the morning light, a beacon of impossible love and defiance, standing against forces that neither human nor spirit could fully control. Opueh held the child close. "No matter what comes," he said, voice steady despite fatigue. "We face it together. The world, the shadows, the ancestors, they will test us, but love will remain our shield." Nkiru's glow flared softly in agreement, wrapping the family in warmth. "We are stronger than death," she said. "Stronger than fear. Stronger than the world itself, as long as we are together." The child, nestled between them, stirred and glowed faintly, a heartbeat that carried the weight of two realms. It was alive, powerful, and full of potential. Even at this young age, it had proven that the impossible could exist, and that love could forge miracles where none should exist. As the sun rose over Umudike, casting gold across the palm groves and river, Opueh and Nkiru knew the path ahead would be dangerous. Trials would come, fear would return, and enemies, both seen and unseen, would test them. Yet for the first time, they felt unshakable. The family, bound by life, death, and love, would face the world together, ready to confront destiny with courage, devotion, and the power of an impossible miracle. At midnight, the village was silent, but whispers drifted on the wind toward Opueh's hut. Shadows had returned, smaller yet sharper, probing the family's defenses. The child stirred, sensing the threat, and glowed faintly, sending a pulse of warmth that pushed back the darkness. Opueh held Nkiru's hand tightly. "They are testing us again," he said. "We must stand firm." Nkiru nodded, her glow steady. "We protect our miracle, no matter the cost." The night stretched long, the whispers fading at dawn, leaving a quiet reminder. The world would not allow their love and child to exist without challenge. The villagers gathered at the edge of Opueh's yard, some holding torches, others clutching charms for protection. Fear mixed with awe as they watched the faint glow emanating from the hut. "Your child is unnatural," an elder shouted. "Leave this place, or suffer the consequences." Opueh stepped forward, standing tall. "This child is life, and it belongs with us." Nkiru's form flared bright, pushing the villagers back with warmth. Even in fear, the villagers could see the truth. They were powerless against the bond between life, love, and the supernatural. Knowing the villagers' fear could become dangerous, Opueh and Nkiru moved their nightly training deeper into the forest. The child's glow guided them, its tiny hands shaping small pulses of energy to repel the shadows. "It learns fast," Nkiru whispered, amazed. "It is more powerful than we imagined." Opueh smiled wearily. "Power alone is not enough. It must learn wisdom and courage." The forest became their sanctuary, where love and training intertwined, preparing the child for trials to come. One evening, lightning struck a tree near the hut, setting it ablaze. Shadows moved in the smoke, circling with intent. The child's glow flared instinctively, pushing the shadows back and extinguishing some of the fire with its energy. Opueh and Nkiru held it close, realizing that every natural force now responded to their child's existence. "This is no ordinary life," Nkiru whispered. "It is a bridge, a beacon, and a target." Opueh's jaw tightened. "Then we fight to protect it, always." Before sleeping, Opueh and Nkiru sat together, the child resting between them. "No matter what comes," Opueh said, voice soft but firm, "we face it together." Nkiru placed her hand on his heart. "Our love has brought life where death ruled. That is sacred." The child stirred, glowing softly, as if acknowledging the vow. And in the quiet of the night, they knew. The future was uncertain, shadows would return, but the family's bond was unbreakable. On a night darker than any before, the shadows returned with fury, twisting and clawing at the edges of the hut. They hissed in voices older than memory, intent on claiming the child. Opueh stepped forward, arms wide, and Nkiru's glow blazed around the child like a shield. The child's tiny hands pulsed with light, and for the first time, the shadows recoiled visibly, as if afraid. "This family is stronger than you imagined," Opueh shouted, heart pounding. Even the spirits seemed to pause, acknowledging the bond between love, life, and courage. Lightning struck the hut, and flames licked the walls. The shadows surged, taking advantage of the chaos. The child floated slightly, its glow intensifying, and with a wave of energy, the fire died, leaving only scorched earth. Opueh and Nkiru watched, tears mixing with soot and sweat. "It is more than a child. It is hope," Nkiru whispered. The night was spent defending not just the child, but the miracle of love and life that had defied death. By dawn, the shadows had retreated once more, battered and humiliated. Before sunrise, the ancestors appeared silently, their forms calm but powerful. They looked upon the family, eyes heavy with judgment. "You have survived the trials," one voice said, echoing like rolling thunder. "You have protected what should not exist. The child lives because of your courage and devotion." Opueh bowed low, Nkiru glowing softly beside him. "We owe everything to love, and to life itself," he said. The ancestors' forms shimmered and faded, leaving a lingering warmth. For the first time, the family felt a blessing rather than a warning. But the world beyond the hut remained uncertain, still full of fear and potential danger. Word of the family's courage spread. The villagers, witnessing the power, protection, and the miraculous survival of the child, began to approach with reverence instead of fear. Elders offered apologies, children peered curiously, and even animals seemed drawn closer. Opueh and Nkiru kept the child between them, smiling through tears. "It is still a long road," Opueh said softly. "But they see now that life and love can create miracles," Nkiru added. The village's fear had softened, replaced by awe and respect, though the memory of past terror lingered. As night fell one final time, Opueh, Nkiru, and the child sat beneath the stars, the air calm and sacred. "We have survived shadows, fire, fear, and even death itself," Opueh said. "But our journey is only beginning." Nkiru smiled, glowing gently, her form wrapped around the child. "Our love brought life to this world. We will protect it forever." The child stirred, tiny fingers glowing faintly, as if understanding the promise. And so, beneath the quiet stars, the family bound by life, death, and love, vowed to face whatever the world or the spirits would throw at them. Together, unbroken and eternal. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.